Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, April 25, 2024. All managers are present, but Manager Hejmati, who will join us just in moments here. Members of the public who are here, I recognize that you all have business before the board, so let us move to approval of the agenda. And one note is that we're going to switch the order of taking up 11.2 and 11.3. Is there a motion to approve the agenda with that change?
Move approval.
Manager Miller?
Second.
Second, Manager Sando. Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we have approval of the last board meeting minutes and the 3 check registers for general checking account, surety checking account, and wire transfer, and 1 resolution, 24024, approval of programmatic maintenance agreement with the City of Mound. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Maxwell moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus second. I forgot your name for a second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have one meeting to report on. This morning, Manager Sando and Manager Olson and I were able to attend the State of the Parks address and expo by Three Rivers Park District. It was really great meeting, really a lot of information, well presented. Board Chair Commissioner Gibbs talked about many of their programs and projects that are ongoing. And of course, they overlap in part with our districts. They talked about Carver Park and the southern part of north-south trail routes that are in long-distance planning, and mentioned a lake in Victoria that's coming off the impaired list, Stone Lake. So that was fun. We were able to talk with, and he called out watersheds particularly as partnership category. We were able to talk with county commissioners, and Mayor Johnson was there from Independence, and a number of others. So it was very informative and really well presented. It was a good event. I'm glad we went. Thanks for going. Minnesota Watershed's quarterly meeting report, Manager Olson.
Well, at this last meeting, the meetings are normally chaired by Sherry White, and she asked me to chair them this time, so it was my very first time being able to do that at the what I call Metro Mod, or the Metro Watersheds. And because we haven't had an in-person meeting, this meeting was well attended. In fact, it was 100% attended by all the scheduled presenters. Normally there'll be 3 or 4 that don't show because they haven't got anything to update on. But everybody showed and had a presentation, so slides were up. And it started off with introductions of our new lobbyist representation, which is a law firm called Lockridge, Grindell, and Nowen. And we had presentations from Jesse Lundeen, Amos Briggs, Kevin Matzig, and Cullen Sheehan. And it is an amazing thing to see a lobbyist group that is made up of former senators and former representatives who are all attorneys who represented the DFL and the IR, and they were all in the room together. And one of the questions I said is, when you go before all those different legislators, how do you tell the same story to your own people? He goes, it's only done by having that IR DFL representation, because that story from one person is interpreted a variety of ways, but when you have your own story, that's the consistency is important, but the way you present it varies. So they were very impressive. They had a very formal presentation, and then a lot of questions and answers. Then we had everything follow that, from the MPCA to the DNR, and I mean, all these groups were there. One of the concerns that they have is the chlorine and the chloride, sodium chloride toxicity in lakes. We have 8 new impaired lakes for salt now, which is really kind of a tough thing for everybody to swallow there. The other thing that they're looking at is synthetic turf. It turns out that there is so much microplastic in synthetic turf, with the little black beads and everything else that's part of it. And all of those fields outside drain into creeks and drain into waterways. And so there's a lot of concern now on the part of the MPCA to examine and to get a handle on just what's going on with that. So more to come with that. The summer tour coming up is going to have a change of venue. Let me take that back. The summer tour is going to be in the Roseau area, and more information will come for that. it's the annual conference in the wintertime that's going to have a change of venue. And instead of going up to Alexandria, we're going to be going to the Grandview Lodge in Nisswa. So it's in the heart of the state so that all the watersheds can converge in that location. The last thing that they talked about was the maintenance of stormwater ponds and the issue having to do with 27% of the ponds in the state are in the hands of the HOAs that control them. And the DNR and the stormwater folks were actually kind of surprised to find out just that massive quantity of ponds that nobody's looking at other than the HOAs. So we're looking for an approach to see if we can, or they're looking at an approach to see if they can get a good handle on the condition of those ponds. So anyway, it was a great meeting and lasted a long time. Got to with all those presentations.
Well, thank you for the report and thank you for attending. Any other meetings or events managers would like to report on? Then let's just take a look at, we have no permits or public hearings, so the first action item, and let me back up here, the upcoming meetings are listed, and of course, May 2nd, we have the field trip, and Manager Miller will attend the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting on May 15th. Then we'll go to item 11.1, the financial audit and funds transfers, and I recognize Mr. Herring.
Thank you, President White. Managers, as Sherry just noted, we've got Andy Herring here from Redpath this evening to walk you through what hopefully is another clean audit, another year behind us. And then after he does that, when we take questions and answer, we've got two resolutions before you this evening, Resolution 2425, accepting the audit, and then 2426 for end-of-year fund transfers and some fund closures. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Welcome.
All right, thank you. Good evening, President White and managers. My name's Andy Herring from Redpath and Company, here once again to present the results of the 2023 financial audit. Overall, great news. It was a smooth audit, so I'll hit on the highlights, and that's what I think is what you'll need to know. The first, no need to try to follow along here, but there's an independent auditor's report in the financial statements. In summary, in our opinion, the financial statements of Minnehaha Creek Watershed District are presented fairly in all material respects. So that's audit lingo to say it's a clean opinion, an unmodified opinion. That's the highest level of opinion you could receive. We say all material respects. We don't audit every single transaction. The point of an audit is not to verify everything is correct to the penny. Our role is to identify any material misstatements if they exist, or misstatements that would affect the judgment of the financial statement user. So there were no material misstatements detected, and once again, a clean audit opinion. And behind the audit opinion is a management's discussion and analysis. That was staff's opportunity to provide some context about what happened during the year financially, explain why certain increases and decreases occurred so that the readers are more educated about why certain events occurred during the year. Following that are the financial statements and then the footnotes, which further describe the financial statements. There is one, it's kind of buried in the middle here, but it's statement 6. That's for the printed version. It's page 44. It's a budget to actual statement for the management planning fund. Shows that total revenues were $554,000 ahead of budget. Expenditures were actually $5.1 million under budget, just due to the timing of projects. And overall, the fund balance was budgeted to decrease almost $5 million, and it ended up increasing $707,000. Again, mainly due to the timing of various projects did not occur in 2023 and they'll occur at a later point in time. Following that in our reports is a report on internal control. So we look at the policies and procedures of the Watershed District. We don't audit all of your policies and procedures, but we were definitely looking at them as part of the audit, making sure that there's a proper segregation of duties, meaning no one person has too much responsibility in any certain area, that there's an appropriate system of checks and balances. We're looking to see that for proper approval of disbursements, for example, and the bank reconciliation is properly approved, so that, again, the checks and balances and the sound financial policies is what we're paying attention to. As part of that, we did not note any deficiencies in internal control. The next report is a report on legal compliance. The State Auditor's Office issues a guide of compliance requirements that we audit. For example, there's requirements relating to contracting and bidding, conflicts of interest, public investments. For example, the Watershed District cannot purchase Microsoft stock. There's only specified investments which can be invested in. So we're looking for a variety of items as part of the audit, and the result there, no compliance findings. Lastly, there's a letter, it's called a communication with those charged with governance is the generic term. So it's a letter of required communications from the auditor to the managers. Really just standard communications this year. A reminder that there are a few estimates in the financial statements. There's a few paragraphs there. We encountered no difficulties in dealing with management or anybody as part of the audit. No disagreements came about. And all in all, the folks at ABDO presented all of the information we asked for on time, and the audit process went smoothly. In the past, in this letter, in past years, we've had a few management points or comments or recommendations. One related to an amount that was held for the city of Minneapolis, and I know plans are well underway of how to partner with Minneapolis to spend that money essentially. And then we've noted in the past about there's some older escrow or surety deposits that are being held. And efforts, I've seen that balance decrease, so efforts are underway and great efforts have been accomplished to identify those old escrows that can be returned. So those points are not in this letter this year because I feel they're essentially resolved.
How long has that Minneapolis liability been around?
15 or 20 years. I think it's since the early 2000s.
It's the 51st Street pond.
60th.
60th, okay.
Yeah. So all in all, an unmodified opinion with no internal control or legal compliance findings. And it's as well as you can do.
All right,
So-
thank you.
With that, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Do managers wish to ask questions at this point?
Just maybe draw a quick one, just is the counties, they were behind our late payments from the taxes. Is that was really high, I thought, from one year to the next. Is that a normal trend for the whole county right now?
I've seen delinquencies higher this year, and it's not so much it's not the county's fault. It's people paying their taxes to
That's
the
what I was
county.
getting at. It just
So
seemed
they
like it was
only,
high.
yeah, they only remit to you, to
What
the
they have.
district, what they collect, exactly. yeah.
Well, it just seemed awful high, a lot of difference between one year and the other. I was just wondering if it was the economy and everything else that was balancing in there.
Yeah, I don't know the reasons, but it's not unique to your watershed district or to any watershed districts. I've seen that across the board this year.
Okay, all right.
There's two different issues there. The collection, the collection rate and the valuations are dropping, especially commercial. Some of the downtown buildings are selling for half what the current owners paid for them, 4 or 5 years ago.
When those taxes are collected at the county, do they send them out to us and they tell us what year they're from, or?
Both, yes. Your primary settlements are around July 1st and December 1st, and then there's a final settlement that's received in January. So if anything that the county is collecting, any delinquencies from January 1st through, I think it's around May 15th, they hold on to that money until July 1st. But then it is remitted to you, and the reports they provide do provide detail on whether that's from your current year's levy or past levies, yes.
Thank you, I wondered about that.
Maybe another quick one, just when you were talking about like the delinquent ones that we're trying to find the person to give the money back to that Deb's been working on, it was really a high number when we started this. Do we know what kind of numbers we have now? Is it 15 left or 20 left or 30 or? No.
I'm sorry, I don't know it off the
No,
top
it's
of my
no
head.
problem.
No,
Yeah, it was
it's-
probably that's fine.
Yeah, we looked at it in the past, I think the past 2 years at least.
Yeah, it's been going down.
number's
No,
been
she's
going
done a
down,
great
yeah.
job on it, but I was just kind of wondering if we're almost down to, a doable number to wipe it all out.
And some have been sent over to the unclaimed funds.
Yeah,
by the
yeah,
state,
to the
too,
state, yeah.
She's got an answer.
Ms. Johnson?
Manager, Maxwell managers, between 2017 and the oldest one, there are 64 remaining. And that's down from over 100.
Over 100, yeah, it was really up there, I know, so, we're
Thank
making
you.
good progress, thank you. Thanks for your work on that too, by the way.
Then let's move to a risk.
I have a couple questions.
Oh, go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yep.
I want to thank you and Redpath and then our staff too for making sure we're in compliance. 2 quick questions. On page 17, under your budgetary highlights, you talk about our fund balance being about 23 million, and that as a measure of our liquidity, our ratio to that fund balance to our expenditures is about 170%. I know that there can be, policies related to that, but do you find that number to be within like a normal and acceptable range of what you see? Is that, or do you have an opinion on that?
That is a tricky question to answer because you really have to analyze
to
the future projects and a longer-term capital plan. If the Watershed District was simply funding operations on a yearly basis, that would represent almost 2 years of operations. And it's probably wouldn't be needed that much, but if a large capital project comes
Right.
up, because it's all reported together, you really need to look at that longer-term capital plan.
Yeah. And that's not part of your annual audit, but we do have a long, multi-year capital plan that speaks for a good portion of those funds. To your point about whether we have large capital projects coming up.
Right.
But I just wanted to make sure, there was a note about it, but not much commentary on it, so I just wanted to ask you about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second question is on the pension liability, the state pension for employees. There's a lot of thorough history in the report, which I appreciate. I can't say I follow all of it. So I guess my layman's question for you is, do you have any advice on kind of how to prepare for or mitigate this liability? And would you suggest or recommend, committing funds for that? Or is this just so deferred that we don't need to worry about it? I've been a part of places where compensated absences can be calculated and committed and put aside so that when someone departs or leaves willingly, you have a fund of money that you can pay them out from versus it coming out of your operating budget. So I don't know how if that concept relates to pension liability, or if you recommend any sort of beyond the awareness you're giving us with multiple pages of history, which I appreciate, is there
Yep.
anything else we could be doing to prepare for this
How
liability?
much is it?
About 1.2 million, was it?
Okay. I get confused whether it's PERA.
Yeah, it is.
Now,
I think it's 1.2.
we're PRA statewide is like 90% funded, which is very, very good.
Yeah, this is, he breaks it down
Yeah.
to our liability.
Okay, I haven't seen the report, so,
Yep.
but I always get confused, the funding percentage of the statewide fund. So our liability is that percent from the fully funded to what is actually invested. Is that correct? So, you know, the stock market just wiped out a lot of liabilities. So
Right.
I don't think we'll ever have to look, at least in the foreseeable future, I don't think we'll have to look at funding it.
Okay, so it's
I
just on
think it's just
paper
a-
and an awareness
Yeah.
item?
Yeah, a few comments there. So compensated absences, another term for accrued vacation, sick. That is a liability that is actually a real liability. If someone retires, you owe that balance to the employee.
Right,
Okay.
Whereas the pension plan provided by para, if someone retires, the district is not responsible for their pension payments for the rest of their life.
right.
The plan is. What the district is required to pay in is 7.5% of their wages every year. And that is consistently done. There's a schedule here that shows the statutorily required contribution as well as what the district has paid in, and those two amounts are equal. So as part of your budget each year, you are budgeting for those para contributions. So that's all of the funding that you're really responsible for by law. There are no laws out there that say, well, if the stock market really drops and para's liability goes up, you'll
Like
be
with
on
a
the
fire
hook for
relief
any
or
more.
something,
Right,
you can
yep.
be held liable, yeah.
So that's
So why actuarialize that detail to our individual liability? Is that a requirement that they make us do?
it's a requirement,
Okay.
yes, and it's.
I was just wondering, like, well, why are you
It's-
telling me this? Like, do I need to?
If you're in Illinois or Chicago, it's
Yeah.
a big
Okay,
number.
do we need to come
They're
up with this?
40% funded.
Yeah.
1.2, or is it?
You do not, no,
Okay.
that you are
All
not
right.
responsible for
You're
paying
just
that amount.
calculating it as an awareness and a requirement.
Right,
Got it. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Let me ask for a motion for Resolution 2425, which is receiving and approving the audit.
Cool.
Manager Miller, second by Manager Olson. I put discussion first this time, unusually, but is there anything else that anyone wants to say before we vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Herring. Turn to you now, Mr. Visco.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, President White, I don't think there's much to cover with Resolution 2426. There's a few small sub-funds that require transfer in to zero out, and the resolution is in your packet.
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconds. Discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
See you next year.
Sounds good.
And thanks also to our accountants. Appreciate it. We'll move now to Resolution 11.3, which is authorization to execute a cooperative agreement with the City of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board and release proposals, or RFP. I did go around talking to people at the thing this morning and telling them this was on our agenda. I was pretty excited about it.
I'm excited too. That was kind of in my notes here. So good evening, President White and Board of Managers. I am really excited to be in front of everybody this evening recommending approval of Resolution 2428 as President White mentioned, that would authorize execution of a cooperative agreement between the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, Minneapolis, and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, essentially establishing a framework for coordinated planning and capital investment between the three parties, and immediately initiating feasibility study on the first three projects in queue, which are along the Minnehaha Parkway. I think the board's pretty familiar with this initiative by now through reports provided over the last year, either by me or from our liaisons, President White, Manager Hejmadi, and Manager Miller. And I'm pleased to be joined tonight by Angie Kraft, the Director of Surface Water and Sewers from Minneapolis, and Michael Schroeder is here as well, Assistant Superintendent of Planning for the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board. He and I got to spend yesterday evening together watching the Admin and Finance Committee advance the agreement through committee unanimously and then up to their full board. And I would just say thank you to both of them. Their leadership's been really instrumental in getting us to this point. And if you have questions or wish to bestow on them congratulatory kudos later, we can get to that. I think everybody's really familiar with the presentation that I've given to the city and the park board already, in particular Angie and Michael, but I thought it would be kind of short selling the initiative this evening and you all if I didn't provide the story again and integrate it into the record. So everybody's going to have to bear with me for 10 minutes or so as we step through what I think is important context for this next chapter in our work. So as everybody knows, our last major initiative in Minneapolis was actually the Nokomis surface and groundwater analysis. So as background, can you not hear me, Manager Hejmadi? Okay. Is that better? I'm usually pretty loud. So as background in underscoring the purpose of the partnership and really to pick up where we left off as an organization in Minneapolis, I wanted to frame some of the lessons that we learned from our years spent navigating the groundwater and surface water issues around Lake Nokomis. I think it gives great context for the partnership structure as well as the proposed projects that we're going to be talking about. And one of the biggest takeaways from our time together in and around Lake Nokomis is that climate change is already here. As a region, the Twin Cities are getting decidedly warmer and wetter. And during the years that we spent responding to resident inquiries, we accumulated almost 3 feet of surplus rainfall. That's the difference between that dark blue line on the bottom, which are normal patterns. Every time you see a gray bar exceed that, that's a deviation from normal, which doesn't look like that much. But the blue line shows the accumulated departure from normal, which you can see just skyrocket. So we were sitting on 36 inches or an additional 3 foot of rainfall through that time period. And we've seen drought since then. So we've already experienced both ends of the spectrum, the boom cycle of flooding as well as the bust cycle of drought. And we know that things are getting more extreme. And the flooding's impacting institutions like Methodist Hospital, our public lands like Hiawatha Golf Course, which receives drainage from the creek and is central to the park board's master planning as part of their regional park system. It's taxed aging infrastructure in Minneapolis, which Angie and her team are really responsible for planning and renewing. And it's damaged our natural systems. This is Minnehaha Creek west of Portland. And so this is our namesake, and everything that's eroded from the creek here ultimately ends up downstream in Lake Hiawatha. Through the Nokomis study, it also brought attention to the old land use decisions that are still impacting us today and driving some of the issues down in Minneapolis. This is a map showing the historic filling of the area's wetlands to make way for development. And we know that there's more than 85% of the wetlands downstream have been lost just due to the time period in which things developed. And across all of those different impacts, I think most notably, we know that people were impacted. And those people chose to get vocally engaged, and they turned to local government looking for answers to questions like, why is my basement wet? Who's responsible and who's going to pay? And I think for us, they were asking, is this a local issue or is this coming from upstream and from the suburbs? And I think importantly, how are the city of Minneapolis, the park board, and the Watershed District really working together for our sustainable future, both to address flooding and to address water quality? So some of the lessons that we boiled down as an organization from our time there, we learned, I think, number one, we've got to do a better job telling our story because we've got a really compelling story, specifically about what we're doing upstream and how all that work benefits Minneapolis downstream. We also, I think, learned and reinforced that we want to take a data-driven approach, and importantly, to make sure that information that's put out is accurate and that we're using data to guide smart investments for a sustainable future. I think we left the experience knowing that while we're doing great work upstream, there's rich opportunities to do work downstream in Minneapolis that can really serve as a complement to what we've already accomplished and form the basis of a sensible and balanced approach. And I think underscoring everything tonight to avoid all the time and effort reactively coordinating to those resident inquiries, we need to be locked up in partnership with our local partners at the City of Minneapolis and the Park and Rec Board. So in the months following the Nokomis Town Hall, we took a step back and took stock of our work upstream. Furthest upstream, we obviously have our Lake Minnetonka strategy where we're focused on the largest tributaries into the lake, all of which drain to bays that are impaired for water quality. And then downstream, we've got our Minnehaha Creek strategy, which is focused on regional stormwater management, expanding flood storage, and connecting green space. And as we zoomed in there and accounting for more than a decade of work, we estimated we had spent somewhere between $25 and $30 million treating over 2,000 acres of runoff outside of Minneapolis in the cities of Hopkins, St. Louis Park, Edina, and Richfield, with obviously a lot of that work concentrated in our greenway, because that's where the data was telling us the highest pollutant loads were coming from and the area of most need. So as our board knows, we've been working with state, regional, and local partners in the private business community here for years to turn the area around by treating over 500 acres of regional stormwater and restoring creek alignment, connecting it to its historic floodplain and expanding storage and creating resilience for downstream. And we've also built amazing, beautiful, and functional places that solve other urban planning needs, like our work at Methodist Hospital, or the daylighting of Minnehaha Creek here at the Minnehaha Preserve, which connected affordable housing units to a new 30-acre nature preserve and brought them in the 5-minute walk shed of transit, and resulted in the 5-acre expansion of Cottageville Park. And our favorite project, our capstone project, 325 Blake Road, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later this evening, where we're integrating regional stormwater with a bold vision for mixed-use development on transit. And so we got to work telling that story, and that was profiled last June on the front page of the Strib. And as we told the story to the steering committee and the park board and the city, in there, Mike Heyman, our project director, signaled that with all that work nearing completion upstream, that we're ready to bring the program downstream and partner with the city of Minneapolis. So since then, as we've carried conversations forward with both Michael and Angie and others, we looked at models of partnership, and we knew we had a good model to draw from with the Clean Water Partnership of the 1990s, where we saw political leaders and our esteemed legal counsel, Lewis Smith, working closely with staff across the agencies to identify clear shared priorities that were backed by science and implement a whole raft of water quality projects that were ultimately nationally recognized as a program of coordinated capital investment that helped improve water quality in the chain of lakes. We also went back and studied our 2018 MOU, which had all those same goals and struggled to launch for a number of different reasons, and worked together, drawing lessons from both of those models. We framed a cooperative agreement that we're here to talk about tonight that leverages all of the learnings to provide both a short-term project focus, a framework for long-range planning so we can identify the next suite of capital projects, and then a governance structure for partnerships so we can sustain this as a program and not just a one-off. And so one of the first things that we had to tackle is where should we start? And as we thought about where to start with the first slate of projects, Minnehaha Creek really emerged as the starting point, logically, for near-term momentum-building projects for a few different factors. Number one, when you refer back to that 1990s Clean Water Partnership, the creek really wasn't a subject of investment back then. In addition, this is an area that we've master planned and is the only master plan that's been fully coordinated thanks to Michael Schroeder's leadership at the Park Board across all three agencies. And that plan contains pretty decent feasibility information. So it's identified projects, costs, benefits, and prioritized those for implementation. And those projects all have a broad impact shed because they're not only benefiting the creek, they're addressing downstream impaired Lake Hiawatha, which is one of the only remaining impairments down in the city. So we took the 30 so projects from the master plan and we boiled those down into 10 with stacked benefit that have water quality, floodplain expansion, and creek restoration elements. And then we identified the top 3 projects out of those that maximize the public's return on investment. These would be projects at Penn, Newton, Nicollet Hollow, and Cedar Bloomington. And together these projects we're estimating could treat over 500 acres of runoff from the city and achieve up to 40% of the city of Minneapolis's waste load allocation to Lake Hiawatha. So a pretty big first bite out of the apple, while also expanding flood storage and with some of the work contribute to the place that's already there along the Minnehaha Parkway. The 2018 master plan estimates these projects to cost approximately $3.4 million total. And we've used that as a guide, and we've identified capital sources, including funds that our auditor mentioned that have been encumbered historically, that would fully fund the projects from all 3 agencies. And those costs, as well as the sources, are outlined in a partnership investment plan that's attached to the draft agreement. But the agreement as drafted doesn't actually commit us to any particular share of capital funding right now. Once it's executed, that would come in subsequent agreements. So it's a roadmap and a shared CIP. Staff's recommendation and the cooperative agreement that's before the board focus us on advancing those 3 priority projects essentially as the first slate into feasibility into 2024 for approximately $150,000, and that would be split evenly 3 ways across the agencies, with the district leading that feasibility work. And then the results of the feasibility would obviously then inform the order in which those projects are implemented, the ultimate capital cost share, and the schedule with which we'd move into design and construction. So as those short-term projects advance and build momentum and feasibility, within the agreement, we've also outlined a second prong where we would work together to tackle some of the longer range planning complexity. And we'd first break the larger system of the chain of lakes and the creek into management units, like we've done in Long Lake and like we've done in 6 Mile Creek, Halstead Bay, based on the receiving waters. And then we'd go about mapping the existing organizational priorities at that scale, looking at the programs or policies, the different projects and funding that currently support flood mitigation and water quality in the city. And then we can use that system understanding broken into those manageable pieces to figure out where there's alignment and where we're doing shared work, and I think importantly where we might be going our separate ways, and there's discrete projects that the different parties are pursuing on their own. And over time, that we think will yield a clear shared strategy, and one that we can communicate publicly, and one that can slide into the next partnership investment plan, a shared capital plan. And then the third piece that's outlined in the agreement to support the pilot projects being advanced and the long-range planning, we've taken note of the partnership structure that really succeeded in the 1990s, and we've included a similar framework in this agreement. So that begins with a technical team of staff from all 3 agencies that after these pilot projects are moving would meet regularly and do technical and planning work to recommend the next wave of partnership implementation plan, a 5-year horizon of projects, costs, sources, timeline. Those recommendations would filter up and be guided and both guided and reviewed by the coordinating team. This is staff leadership from the 3 agencies, myself, Michael Schroeder, and Angie are fulfilling that role right now. And then the coordinating team would periodically present recommendations to a policy steering committee. This would be our board liaisons, 3 park board commissioners, 3 city council members and representatives from the mayor's office. And that steering committee would obviously give feedback. They're not making any binding decisions, and they'd be reporting back out to their respective bodies to guide support from the respective agencies through the different budgeting processes. So those are really the 3 prongs in the agreement. And this is the timeline that if the board authorizes execution tonight that we'd be getting into. We would be beginning the this quarter, quarter two, we'd be approving the cooperative agreement, we'd be seeing the appointment of steering committee members, and we'd release the RFP. The city of Minneapolis is finished. The park board finished last night, so we're last on deck. And so after this evening, the request for proposals would hit the street. And then hopefully by the end of quarter two, we'd be back in front of the board, I think around July 11th. So I'm being generous with Q2. It's, we're about 11 days over, but we'd have consultant selection in front of the board. We'd be starting feasibility and probably middle of July convening the steering committee to provide an update on the schedule for feasibility, who's been selected, talking about communications plan, as well as next wave management unit planning, perhaps with some emphasis on Cedar Lake and Nokomis, as the park board has lifted those up as priorities in their own work due to harmful algal blooms. That would have us towards quarter three and quarter four, finishing the feasibility, making next phase recommendations for which projects go in which order, with which apportionment of capital costs across the different agencies, and bringing back the next wave of cooperative agreements. So again, thanks for bearing with me. I think you've seen and heard some of that before. We're asking for your support and approval of resolution 2428 this evening, and I'd stand for any questions, as would I think Michael and Angie.
Thank you, Mr. Whisker. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Hishmati. Okay, questions, discussion, feedback?
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you for all your work.
Good work.
Just a comment, just want to thank all three of you for working so well together to pull this off. Thank you.
Well, it's a big deal
It is.
to have
Yes,
this,
it is.
this
This is a very big deal.
program set out that we can keep going and work together and accomplish so many things. I think I'm really just pleased as punch.
Yeah. We're really excited to get started. I think we've enjoyed the journey up to this point. It's always anticlimactic when you get to the finish line. I was kind of expecting a balloon drop or something, but it didn't happen. So we'll have to save that for when we get to groundbreaking.
It's really all about partnerships, and it really just makes logic, because when you get partners, they really want to get involved, and we get in the right direction. So it's a lot about partnerships, so thank you too.
And if we had like a way to go award, the list would be so long that people would fall off the table, because my goodness, it took a lot of effort and a lot of people, a lot of different input. Terrific, just terrific. Are we ready to vote?
Anything from the crowd? You want to talk the board out of it?
Yeah, you never listen yourself into trouble.
Do you still have the large stack of drawings we got 6 years ago? The ideas of those different projects?
Yeah, the master plan. That's what everything's based off of. So yeah, of course we have that.
I'll have to relocate that.
Yeah. We can send that out for the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yeah, I think
We want
so.
something big.
Balloons, we'll release balloons.
Yeah.
I have some leftover 70th birthday party balloons. Pick up real quick.
It is really, it's, yeah. Huh. Can be so quiet. We'll move to item 11.2, Mr. Beck. Thank you.
Thank you, President White, Board of Managers. Tonight, I'll be requesting authorization to execute contracts with Virginia Tech and Streamline Technologies for review of the watershed-wide 2D model development. So just to give a high-level overview of what I'll be talking about tonight, first, we'll just talk about how the 2D model fits into the watershed-wide model and the context for that. Context about the pilot model and how we use these external advisors to improve how the model was built and inform our decision making. How we intend to integrate these external advisors into the watershed-wide model build. And then lastly, just near-term next steps and the recommendation. So this is a slide that we've shown a few times before, but it's worth kind of going over again, which is the climate action framework. And that is the 3 pillars: understand, predict, convene and plan, and implement, measure, and adapt. 2D model is a large portion of that understand and predict pillar, with the idea that we really want to be able to understand what the impacts to our watershed are going to be from climate change in the future, in addition to identifying how to adapt through projects and policy strategy. And so the model build, just as this is the highest level Gantt chart I think that we can have, is the model build will occur from, it started in earnest technically last week, and that the contract was authorized, executed, and will run through mid-2025. Then there'll be scenario analysis using the model, and that's not part of this model build contract, so I added a different kind of slight color there. But, you know, again, this is only that understand and predict phase. We also have the convene and plan. And in parallel with the model build, we'll be convening partners to work with them to understand what are their concerns, how are they thinking about climate change and the impacts for them. And from that, we'll be able to understand what scenarios they'll want to be able to run to identify how they can adapt to climate change as well. So the goal really is to take what we learn from them and develop scenarios based on what they need and what we need. And then lastly, taking all that information and compiling it into the 2027 comp plan is the goal. And so, kind of zooming back into the understand and predict phase, which is this 2D watershed-wide model build. And as a reminder, just any model build is taking those geographic layers that we have, so our soils, our land use, taking that information and creating a digital representation of our physical world. So understanding how different scenarios would actually impact our watershed and how water moves through our system, so we can actually predict what's going to happen and identify projects that will be cost effective but also help us adapt effectively.
Can you fall back on that?
Yeah.
Identifying natural resources most in need of protection. What would that report be like?
Yeah, so
I mean, you know, I know you got a lot of work to do before you get there, but what could we look forward to as a policy manual?
I guess I may not be able to answer that question, but regarding what the natural resource is in need of protection, for example, as we get more rain, you're going to have higher velocities in a creek, which is going to cause erosion, which could degrade habitat for a certain portion of a creek. So identifying where erosion would be greater and maybe you need to identify that are more susceptible to erosion. So that could be an example of
Okay.
the natural resource impacts.
Thanks.
Okay, so if we break that into an actual how we're going to build the model instead of just kind of an extremely high level of a 2D model build, there's always the phase one, which is you have to take all of those data sets, process them, and then take that information and you load it into some sort of modeling software. And so you have to take everything, standardize it, and put it into a modeling software so you can actually run your scenarios. And so as we applied for LCCMR grant funding for the first time, we had to do that a couple times, we didn't initially get the funding from LCCMR. So knowing that we had the end goal of the 2027 comp plan, we wanted to keep moving forward. And so we identified the need to, number one, establish a semi-automated data processing network or framework so we could have a repeatable way to build out models in the future. And then secondly, we wanted to be able to test several different models so we knew that it could answer the climate questions that we had. And the way that came together was first we, for context of the pilot model specifically, we built out two small areas, one in the city of Edina, one in the city of Victoria to represent a rural and a more urbanized area, and built out those semi-automated processes that we would scale watershed-wide. We brought in a variety of external advisors, and as they reviewed the model development, model findings, and the scenario runs for that, they had a few questions relating to the performance and accuracy of one of the modeling software packages. And one of the questions we had was it the modeling software itself, or was it how the model was built? Because those could be the two possible options. So we went further by bringing Streamline Technologies, which is the developer of one of the software packages, and Virginia Tech, who has a faculty member who does watershed modeling at a large scale to understand climate impacts. So bringing these two groups in to ensure that the models were built in a way that first wouldn't have any issues, but then also is consistent with how people would build watershed models for climate scenario analysis. And yes.
Did you pull that expert in from Virginia Tech in that advisory group based on that specialty?
So yeah, exactly. Okay. We had met with them a while back just through kind of happenstance.
Okay.
And so we pulled them into the original, the initial review.
Yeah, I see that.
And then we asked them if they could go further by not just reviewing the output, but actually kind of pulling apart the model and rebuilding it.
Okay.
And so they did that for us. Yeah.
Neat, thanks.
And so what we found after those two groups took the models apart and really tried to understand if there was any issues is they did some small tweaks that really weren't a very large effort, but were fairly consequential in the long run in that they dramatically improved performance and accuracy of the model. So a lot of the issues that were flagged by the panel were resolved just through a few model adjustments. And so with that, we did move forward with ICPR4 because it has that surface water, groundwater coupled model, and the importance which James highlighted at the previous presentation, which is if you get 6 years of record-breaking precipitation, it fills up all of your storage, including your groundwater. So understanding those two pieces is really important. Small kind of note is that they've rebranded to Stormwise, the program, so we'll be calling it that now. I guess it's slightly better than ICPR4. So just as a note, I've never been sure when to bring that into a presentation, but this felt like a good time. So they rebranded last month to that, and so Stormwise is the model we went with. And lastly, that brings us today, which is we're beginning the model build with HDR. And so we are moving into this watershed-wide portion, and we've actually finished the watershed-wide data processing of all the county, statewide, and municipal stormwater data sets, and did that in 2023 with the beginning of the LCCMR funding, and that moves us into this model build portion. And so the learning that we had from that pilot model is, as a reminder, was that that expert panel is extremely valuable to improve accuracy, quality, and performance. What we learned from processing those data sets from all the different cities, from the state, from the counties, was that there's actually many data gaps, which we knew was going to happen. You can't ever have all of the data that you want. It's never going to be comprehensive. There's always going to be some data gaps. But there was very little information on storage, so ponds, wetlands, in the municipal, county, and statewide data sets, and very few kind of culverts, so areas that water can move under streets. So those were two data sets that had many gaps in them after we processed the watershed-wide data. And so that really brings us to our scope with HDR, and what I'll do is run through the scope and then explain how the panel is going to get integrated into the work that we're doing for the model. And so there's first just the data discovery, which we're going to get into relatively soon here with HDR. We're sending that over. But the next step is before we actually start building a model, we're going to have a series of workshops to discuss how you're going to build the model so we don't end up in a situation where model choices end up impacting the quality of the models, because there's many different ways you can build a model, and little decisions end up causing kind of ripple effects through the model build that you don't want to have to try and fix retroactively. After we develop that approach for building the model, figuring out how we incorporate that storage data set into the data set that we already have, and lastly, taking the process that we've built out to automate the data processing and figure out how to incorporate the storage piece into the data processing framework. And from all that, we'll have an initial model build, and we'll identify, based on the initial model build, where the issues are, where maybe there's errors in the model, where there's water building up where it shouldn't, identify where the critical data gaps are. And lastly, take that data that we've collected, those critical data gaps, and put that into the final model. And so the question is, how do you incorporate external advisors into this in a meaningful way, but also not into every single aspect of the scope? As we identified anywhere where there is kind of a major decision point, so is the data quality enough to move forward, or is there any unusual assumptions or things that got incorporated into the data? What is the model data, or the model build approach that we're going to take, and have the external advisors vet that and give their opinion on that, in addition to how we're going to incorporate that storage. And lastly, they will be reviewing the initial model build and that final model build. And lastly, and this is kind of just a small note, which is we have a budget within HDR scope to go out and collect data, and we have identified the potential that MCWD may need to collect, do some level of augmentation of data collection. Likely we won't need to, but potentially we will, because there'll be critical data gaps, and I think that we feel comfortable that those critical data gaps can be filled. But then there's going to be a variety of discretionary data gaps to be filled. And so we want to ensure that the data gaps that would really improve the model dramatically, but aren't trivial or collected, and then anything that isn't necessary we can fill with assumptions. So there's the potential of that, but before we go through that model approach, the data discovery, we want to make sure that there's the potential that we may need to purchase some survey equipment just to augment that data collection. And so that's the kind of high-level overview over the next year and a half. The kind of zooming into the next month, we have a kickoff meeting with HDR and the MCWD climate team in early May, so we're still working out the details of that. We're pending board approval of contracting with these advisors. We'll be moving into developing contracts in early May with the advisors to work with us, so we can get them into those model, the data review, and also the model workshops. And lastly, if we identify through the initial data review period that there may be enough kind of those discretionary data gaps that may exist, we want to request authorization at a future meeting to buy survey equipment to help out with that. But with that, what we're asking for is support for Resolution 2427 to contract with Virginia Tech and Streamline Technologies.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Olson, second Manager Hachmadi. Questions? Manager Olson?
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, but she called on you, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna
Not a question, but a comment. One of the concerns I had was that we contract with our professor friend at Virginia Tech, and this is exactly what I was asking for, so I really appreciate the work you did to put it together.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I'm very grateful you're running this project, thank you. I caught about half of that, so I think I get the gist. But, you know, the data gaps on the wetlands and the ponds, it sounds like we're gonna need to fill some of those gaps, and you're estimating it's probably gonna be with survey equipment. And I know it's a few steps ahead, but would you, when you present that, you know, obvious questions of who would be running that equipment, why do we wanna own it? How does that compare to outsourcing it versus owning it? Do we use it in the future for something? Do we sell it? It seems like it's a really useful thing to own, but then is someone trained in it? And how many requests do you have to come out and look at everything and do surveys for people? So I understand the dream to fill these data gaps, and I support you exploring how to do that. I just would encourage you to look at more than one way to do it. Not just buying survey equipment, but perhaps there's outsourcing, or perhaps there's rental and part-time employees versus like it becoming a ingrained service of ours.
Absolutely. Manager Loftus, I think all of the questions that you just raised are probably
Yeah.
the exact right questions to be asking. And I think one of the pieces that, as I wrestled with kind of whether or not to, whether we fill them, whether we'd say, well, enough is enough. Number one, figuring out kind of how many there are and figuring out
What's significant, what's not.
what's significant, what's not, what's within, because HDR does have surveying budgeted, and we have a contingency outside of their budget as well.
Yeah.
And we're under budget for the previous contract with Bolton Mink for 20,000, which they also do surveying, so we have kind of this layered piece, but I think we wanted to make sure that as we move forward, you know, that the board is aware that that might be something that we need to do, but yeah, rental, contracting out, and then also purchasing it are kind of the varying levels of what we could do, so that's all the questions were great ones.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Probably a strange question, but is there any discussion for this professor for Virginia Tech ever coming out here to look at, you know, instead of just graphics and everything else, just visually look at stuff?
Manager Maxwell, we actually were hoping that he'd be able to come out for the meetings for these workshops, just because a lot of times it's in person is better.
Yeah.
But he is expecting his first child, so he said that he didn't think that this year would be the best year to come out. But I think in the future it might be useful.
Yeah,
And
it's just. You know,
Tell them to come in
visually see
January.
yeah, exactly. But I think as we move forward and think about the climate scenario analysis, he's somebody that we've seen as would be very valuable.
Yeah, relying on,
Yeah.
I think it's just better to visually see something instead of just looking at a piece of paper that, oh, look, mom, looks like it's this way, something like that. So,
Yeah, no, that's certainly an option.
I have a small question and a comment. I think that we authorize purchase of a bigger, faster computer for running models. Where's the status of that?
Purchased and assembled, and
Uh-huh.
we had to, there was a few issues with some of the components, and so we have it back and they're working on it right now, so.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll be able to see it relatively soon. It's not as impressive, it looks mostly just like a computer.
see it.
I know.
Just
Yeah,
curious.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't.
But the comment is that I know you brought this 2D modeling and this whole concept before us in the beginning, and so thank you so much. That really ratcheted things up a level, I think. And I'm just really pleased to see how this is going.
Thank you,
Value.
Manager. President.
Did you have a comment, Mr. Whisker?
Maybe just more to President White, Manager, share something of a humorous anecdote. I think we were generally ready on some of the survey equipment ahead of this meeting. And then Brian and I conferred and we discussed some of the benefits of waiting. And the basis of the conversation was, what kind of questions might Manager Loftus ask? And we're like, she's probably going to ask, have you considered outsourcing it? How are you going to train people? We talked about, should we rent it? We need to detail what the long-term uses are, so I just wanted to reinforce to the board that we're listening and you're doing a good job training us.
Excellent, excellent.
You won't need me in 6 months. You'll
Are we ready to vote?
be able to anticipate it all.
Conversation happened almost verbatim.
Really?
It was great.
Really?
You listed the
Oh,
exact
perfect.
things that we discussed.
everybody's got it
Nothing if
memorized.
not predictable.
Wonderful. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
We're going to be moving to 325 Blake Road Restoration, Mr. Heeman. And in anticipation of going to closed session, just take a moment before we do to allow staff to leave who aren't required to stay late. Can I have a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
I'll take,
I don't think we're ready yet.
you are so right. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Chair White and managers. If you're up for predictions, we could start with this one to give me an idea of where we're going to end up here. We are here to provide an update on the 325 Blake Road project, and as discussed during the April 11th meeting, late March and early April really marked a deadline for a few of the contract requirements with the purchase and sale agreement with Lattice for the development component of the 325 Blake site. To recap briefly where that conversation ended at the last meeting and some of the key dates, March 31st was the deadline of the feasibility period, at which time, if Lattice had not opted to terminate the contract, it was moving towards closing, which then provided a 3-day window to deposit that $100,000 in earnest money, so the April 3rd deadline. We had not received that payment as of April 4th, and so we did deliver a letter to Lattice asking for an update on conditions to close, as well as requesting that those funds be deposited immediately. We do know that Lattice has been working closely to secure its capital partner and investment firm with Kane Anderson, and that relationship, or them working to advance that opportunity, was really some of what was provided as structure for the potential third amendment, the draft third amendment that we had discussed with the board at that April 11th meeting, and is really the basis for some of our further discussion this evening. Excuse me. A main consideration in the last discussion was that with this April 16th deadline that Lattice had flagged as a pending capital decision from its potential partner, there was no need to fast track a third amendment draft, and we could just wait for that week, see where the capital partner ended up, and then provide an update this evening and a better understanding of what needs there may be for the development in terms of extensions or other structures. I will note that in the meantime, we did receive word from First American that the $100,000 earnest money payment was deposited on April 11th for that Phase 1B property as contemplated in the purchase and sale agreement. So with that in consideration of the Third Amendment and the structure of the Third Amendment as previously described, there are some decision points or conversation points for the board this evening that would be best handled in closed session if the board sees fit. And so at this time, if that is so desired by the board, we would look to Lewis Smith to potentially lead the board into closed session for those conversations.
Thank you. Would you state the reason for the closed session, Mr. Smith?
Yes, Madam President, managers. So you've had the update, which is the public information. Mr. Heyman is proposing that we discuss issues around a proposed third amendment to the purchase and sale agreement. And under the open meeting law, you have the authority to go into closed session to discuss the terms for an offer to sell real estate that you own. And so we specifically want to note for the record, this is for 325 Blake Road in Hopkins, and would recommend a motion that you go into closed session for purposes of discussing the proposed third amendment to the purchase and sale agreement.
Thank you. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Manager Maxwell, second by Manager Hajmati. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Closed session.
Are we going back out?
Yes. May I have a motion to go into open session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are at the administrator's report. I skipped number 13.
We're missing something.
I skipped number 13. Let me go back to that. Are there any issues, inquiries, or? Now we're at the administrator's report.
Very good. Thank you, President White, managers. Quick water level update, not too much to report. I've already let you know the stop logs have been removed from the dam. I think it was on April 10th, so the dam's fully operational for the season, but not open and flowing yet. Lake Minnehaha is still fairly low, 928.9, so about 7 inches below the height at which the dam would normally be opened. The creek does have some flow in it, some base flow, and from the recent rains, so creek's flowing at 20 cubic feet per second. Since that's slightly above base flow, we are going to keep the dam closed for a while. I mentioned last time the recent rains have pulled us out of drought status, but that's fairly tenuous. I think the temperature outlook in the near future shows a 50% chance of above normal temperatures for the whole month of May. And we know when it's sunny and warm, evaporation is pretty high on Lake Minnehaha, and that might contribute to more lowering of the lake levels. So that's where we stand on the water levels. I was asked by Samantha to just give a quick plug for this year's spring field trip with the Citizens Advisory Committee. That's scheduled for May 2nd. I think that's next Thursday, and includes visits to both the 6 Mile Marsh Prairie Trail and Wasserman Lake Preserve. As you know, this is kind of a capstone each year for the Citizen Advisory Committee's onboarding, the whole CAC, but new member onboarding. And it's an opportunity for the board, staff, and CAC members to just connect, learn about key projects, and be out in some of the spaces that we've created. So Samantha's really interested in getting your RSVPs via the calendar invitation that she's already sent. So please make sure to accept or decline that so that they can plan on food and beverage, or just let her know directly. She's looking for response by end of day Monday. Because we were visiting a couple of sites, which is different than last year when we went to Cottageville, and we've got a decent number of people going, Samantha's reserved a bus. So we'd be busing out from here, and so let us know if you want to take advantage of that or if you want to meet us on site. That's something to keep in mind. She's obviously looking for an accurate head count, so that's my third reminder to just RSVP and let her know so that no one's lost in the shuffle. If you're going to ride the bus, you'll need to be here before 12:30 p.m. on Thursday so that you can check in before departure and be assigned your buddy so we don't lose anybody at a stop. She's got activities at the Prairie are kicking off at 1 p.m. She'd sent some additional details, let her know if you've got questions. And she said, for those of you that attended last year's trip to Cottageville Park, she's promising this year is going to be bigger and better. And then some kind of communications updates. We've historically used a platform called MailChimp to send out newsletters. We used to have what was called a splash newsletter, which was kind of general education information that went out to communities, and that's been discontinued for a long time. Samantha and I have rebooted MailChimp, and the reconfiguration of the platform is really geared around supporting strategic communications with general public, but also elected officials and key partners about our project and policy initiatives. So going forward, they've restructured the newsletter into targeted geographic communications based around our focal geography. So there will be like a Long Lake Creek's Watershed newsletter that will go out to councils, Long Lake Waters, 6 Mile Creek, Halstead Bay, the Greenway, as well as the Parkway and Chain of Lakes. And those will be available on the website, kind of like how you've seen Gov Delivery for other organizations, where the public will be able to click and sign up and subscribe, and we'll be subscribing our key partners to those. And then information will be pushed out on some sort of calendar basis, but also just when there's key updates. The reason for letting you know is, I think it's pretty cool, but also you're going to be subscribed. So you can start to see a little bit more email in your inbox. We're going to make sure staff, the board, and the CAC get those. So as we push key communications out on all of our different initiatives to the public, it's going to be a great way for you to just stay informed as to what's happening and the messages that we're pushing out externally. Word must be getting around that we're good supporters of municipal infrastructure projects. I think we talked about writing a letter of support for Lake Township's request for bonding through the session for regional sanitary improvements. City of Minnetrista just reached out. They are going to be looking to install 2 additional drinking water wells due to exceedance in manganese and iron in the aquifers where water is drawn. Mound also has a drinking water issue that they've been pursuing and secured bonding for, so that's kind of interesting. They are putting together a package of letters that they're sending over to Dean Phillips. It's slightly outside of our mission, but seems limited risk, and I think signals that we're a partner for Minnetrista. So unless there's any objections to that, we draft a letter. They let us know yesterday, I think, or maybe it was Tuesday, and they would like a letter by tomorrow. So we plan to send them a letter.
What, a question for Chris. What about iron do they think they're going to solve another well? I mean, we're sitting on a whole state of iron.
Managers, they'll try to go to a deeper aquifer is what they'll try to do, and look for concentrations that have lower levels. what they're gonna try to do. I don't know what specifically they propose. The two things you'll do is you'll go to a different aquifer, so you go deeper, or you put in a water treatment facility to be able to treat
Okay.
that as well. And doesn't sound like they're putting in a water treatment facility, they just really wanna go down.
Okay, thanks.
Great question. And then final thing, Manager Loftus had sent over an interesting Strib article probably, I don't know, 3 weeks ago about the city of Proctor. They ended up in court over a contested bid process over a $700,000 public works garage that they were building because they gave the project to the second lowest bidder. The attorney had helped the council determine that the low bid wasn't the lowest responsible or responsive bid. And they were looking at the character of the company, were they skilled enough for the job, and their history on similar projects, which is something that you do pretty typically when you're considering responsiveness. And that's making its way through Court of Appeals. And I'm sure with every court case, there's probably more context that we don't have and are missing. The reason for bringing it up is the board's historically commented about low bid and whether or not we're getting a quality bidder. I think Manager Miller, who just stepped out, has brought it up with regards to some of our boardwalk reconstruction issues. We have worked through a qualification or quality-based selection process before where we haven't selected low bid. We've done that, I think, on one project historically in a very, very carefully, legally structured process. But Manager Loftus had also just asked how this might relate to not selecting the lowest cost proposal for professional services, which we've, on occasion done with some regularity. So I'd asked Lewis to think about that and be prepared to speak to it on a construction level as well as professional services level in terms of what the legal requirements are and then also just the governance policies that we've set up, and see if you have any questions about that.
Who's the plaintiff?
I
It's
don't,
the lowest bidder.
the low,
Went and sued the city for not selecting them because they feel they went off of,
Their guidelines.
they went and heard that they had a bad reputation or a union employee. I can't remember all the specifics, but they had a non-stellar reputation based on, I don't know how much research or how much facts they had on it. They decided they weren't responsive or whatever and went with the second bidder, and the company and the first bidder saying, no, you didn't pick me, I was the lowest bidder, and you didn't have a valid reason for not picking me. And now they're sitting there with a half-built
Half a garage.
structure that's like molding and water damage because they have to wait through this court proceeding to figure it out. I know, it just,
so there's the construction issue and then there's also, I mean, you'd asked with relation to some of the professional services which are kind of governed there.
Okay, thank you.
Managers, you're under no obligation to select the lowest priced service provider. The Uniform Municipal Contracting Law applies to acquiring goods, equipment, or construction of projects on improvements to real property. So within the Uniform Municipal Contracting Law, there is the alternative to go toward best value. And that is, as James said, on occasion you've done where you go through a fairly painstaking process to articulate criteria of what you're looking for and then get requests for proposals, not bids. And so you evaluate the proposals and it gets you to a position of negotiating where you think you'll get the best value given your scoring criteria.
So do we always do proposals and don't?
No, you almost always, for construction projects, do bids.
Okay.
and best value is subjective?
It's not subjective, but it's based on alternatives and more factors than just simply price.
But we can determine that each time,
Yes.
and we determine that for ourselves, those
Yes.
criteria, okay.
And normally, if you know the kind of construction project and with the engineer's help, you have the specifications and the details, you know what it is you want to see constructed with that fine level of detail, then you want to get the lowest responsible bid and select based on price. If you're not sure, if there's a variety of techniques or materials that may come into play, and you just want to articulate the outcome you're seeking and how to get the best value to get there, that may be the occasion to go down that road. But it's not typical. Then I would say there have been occasions where we've been nervous as a team about who the lowest bidder is, given performance and other problems. And from a legal standpoint, we know that you go through a fairly rigorous drill to make sure that if you're not going to select the lowest bidder, you're going to have a variety of really specific criteria that give you good reasons for not selecting them. The fact of the matter is, if you're the lowest bidder and you don't get selected, that, in a public process, that affects your business's reputation. And it may motivate you to, litigate if you don't feel happy about that outcome. So I would say it is fairly unusual to not select the lowest bidder. And when you're into that situation, you want to make sure you have a really good record and a really good objective basis for the reasons why you don't find them responsible and responsive. Let's see, I think that covers the main points. You have a policy that you've adopted as a board that you would like to seek proposals on professional services anytime the estimated cost exceeds a threshold amount of something like $25,000. So that's just been a policy that the the board has imposed itself. It's not required by state statute or other law. The reason why the Uniform Municipal Contracting Law only is limited to goods and construction projects is the notion that professional service delivery has a variety of other factors other than price to consider.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
In today's economy, should that $25,000 be raised to like $50,000? Because nothing's really that cheap. I mean, that's pretty hard to find something for $25,000 now, where you don't have to start looking at all the stuff for a proposal more than a bid. Yeah, that's probably, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Would it make sense to raise that level up from 25 to 50?
I'd look to the staff for how they're experienced.
I just have to think about it. They don't have to answer that. I just.
Did that number come from the public bidding statute?
Well, it might have, because the lowest number goes down to 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We might have tied it to that.
I'll bet you that's what we did.
Okay.
And it still does.
I'm sorry.
We had 10 for a while.
Yeah.
Okay. 25.
Thanks for bringing that to James's attention. That's
I
great.
appreciate you taking it as a teaching moment or learning moment, a reminder. I'm always struck by, we're not the only agency who has,
Proposal versus bid. I'm gonna love
projects sitting there and dealing with
understanding that.
bidding and construction, and, it's a perpetual
Interesting.
learning experience. So, thanks for looking into it.
I could note one thing, just so the board is aware, Madam Chair, managers, we've also worked really closely with Smith Partners, with Chuck in particular, to strengthen our bid process, to sort of, I wouldn't say, get between the bid and proposal process, but we do require good language in all of our bids now that is tied specifically to demonstrating similar projects completed within the last X amount of years, which we didn't previously have. And some of that was because of using the best value procurement process for Cottersville Park, really helped. And we initiated conversations around, well, how far can we go in understanding a contractor's capabilities while still conducting an open bid process? So that is something you'll see in all of our plans and all of our specifications at the front end bid process.
Can you check for liens and criminal backgrounds? No, I'm serious. I don't know. Is that allowed?
I would imagine that's
Public
allowed when we
information.
go through. I mean, we've had some challenges with some contractors in the last few years that are slow responsive bids, and sometimes that's just out of your control in terms of how they perform on a particular project.
The only reason it caught me too is it was from a different perspective than what we normally think, or what I normally think of. You know, it was from that bidder who got turned down perspective. And the city and the neighbors sitting there with a half-baked project till this lawsuit played out. And I just thought, oh, I feel bad for every party involved there. So, could be any of us.
Does that help answer your questions?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
It's good to put that in the middle. That's all we have for the admin report.
All right. When Gibbs was talking this morning, he mentioned that besides Stone Lake, there was Fish Lake, of course, your neighborhood, so, and that's been real well publicized in the paper too.
Yeah, they can be listed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's good news.
Stone and Wasserman, that'd be great. To occur.
Thank you, everyone. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks.